Numbers never lie. People do. That's the certainty that guided me for the 182 days between the moment I overheard my father and sister planning to kick me out of our home and the night I blew up their lives during a birthday toast. Honey, your sister's boyfriend is moving in with us. You'll need to find another place to live. That's how my father, Rob, delivered his plans, right in the middle of his 60th birthday party with 50 guests as witnesses. And like any good financial analyst, I coldly calculated my response. I don't have the money to leave. I spent it all last month, buying this house. I'll never forget the look on their faces when I placed the deed on the table. Now I wonder, was the revenge I planned for 6 months truly worth it, or is there a higher price to pay? Let me tell you how I got here. Our Sunday dinners always followed the same ritual: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and superficial small talk about the week. Nothing to upset digestion or challenge the family status quo. Until that Sunday in January when Megan arrived with Ethan unannounced. "Everyone, this is Ethan, my friend," she said, blushing in a way that already indicated friend was a euphemism. He brought a bottle of cheap wine and smiles that were a little too wide. "And what do you do, Ethan?" I asked after 20 minutes of him talking about revolutionary projects without ever explaining exactly what they were. "I'm a digital artist. I work with immersive visual experiences," he replied, looking more at my father than at me. Megan defended him with every question I asked, as if protecting a treasure. My father, usually critical of strangers, seemed enchanted by his stories about the future of digital art. That night, I opened a new notebook and wrote the date on the first page. Something told me I'd need to document what was to come. 3 weeks after that first lunch, Ethan's lime green toothbrush had a permanent spot in the bathroom. Then came a few t-shirts forgotten after a shower, a laptop charger permanently plugged into the living room outlet, and finally, a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. "Could we rearrange the rooms?" Megan was saying quietly to my dad in the kitchen while I was supposedly watching TV. "The guest room is too small for all his stuff." I found the first overdue notice by accident, fallen behind my father's nightstand, when I went to get a headache pill. It was open and showed 3 months of arrears on the mortgage he'd always claimed was paid off years ago. I photographed the document with my phone before putting it back exactly where it was. That night, I had the first of many tense conversations to come. "Dad, is everything okay with the house finances?" I asked casually during dinner. He choked on his juice, coughed, and answered too quickly, "Of course, why wouldn't it be?" Megan rolled her eyes as if my question was absurd. Ethan, however, watched me with a new interest. I realized then that a game was being played under our roof, and I needed to learn its rules quickly. Ethan's Instagram was an impressive gallery. Artsy photos in expensive locations, always tagging famous companies, as if they were partnerships. But something didn't add up. The comments were few, always from the same 5 or 6 profiles. Digging deeper, I found abandoned old profiles, and a pattern began to emerge. In each city, a new relationship, always with women from stable families. Always the same story of imminent projects that never materialized. Real estate documents usually hold more stories than novels, Matthew Matt told me at our first meeting in his minimalist office in Center City, Philadelphia. I'd come on the pretext of understanding tenant rights, but the conversation soon shifted to my own home situation. "Does your father actually hold the clear title, or is he still financing?" he asked, adjusting his thin-rimmed glasses. When I told him about the letter I found, his dark eyes narrowed. "Eleanor, I think we need to check the real status of this property. I can help if you trust me." I left with his card in my pocket and a strange feeling in my stomach. Fear mixed with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The call came on a Tuesday in April, while I was finalizing a risk analysis at the bank. "Ms. Vance, your father was admitted to the ER at Penn Medicine, Hospital of the University of Pennsylvania. Very high blood pressure." I drove like a maniac down the Schuylkill Expressway, imagining the worst scenarios. At the hospital, I found Megan crying dramatically in the hallway, with Ethan comforting her in an almost rehearsed manner, as if posing for a photo no one was taking. "It was just a scare," my father said later, medicated and stable. Megan had gone to buy something from the cafeteria, and Ethan had gone to the restroom. We were finally alone. "Dad, why did you hide that the house is still being financed?" I asked directly, taking advantage of his momentary vulnerability. His tired eyes widened, then lowered in defeat. "How did you—" he started, then stopped. "I didn't want to worry you. I had to refinance a few years ago to cover some debts." He paused, took a deep breath. "Ethan has been helping me think of creative solutions for our finances." My heart froze. What kind of creative solutions could a chronically unemployed man offer? And why would my father, always so careful with money, trust him instead of me, the family's financial analyst? At that moment, I decided my investigation needed to go deeper and fast. "You must be Eleanor." The voice surprised me as I waited for my coffee at the morning grind near my work. I turned and came face to face with a woman my age, curly hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. "I'm Sarah," she added, seeing my confusion. "Ethan's ex." My first instinct was to walk away. Ex-girlfriend drama wasn't on my agenda for that May morning, but something in her eyes made me stay. "He's living with you all now, isn't he?" 50 minutes and 2 coffees later, the math finally added up. Ethan had a pattern so predictable it would be comical if it weren't tragic. It starts with small loans, then he suggests ideas to help with the family's financial problems, Sarah explained, nervously fiddling with the sugar dispenser. By the time I realized it, he'd convinced my dad to invest his entire retirement savings in a revolutionary business that never existed. She pushed an envelope towards me. "Here are copies of 3 police reports filed against him. They didn't go anywhere because the families were too embarrassed to pursue it." I put the envelope in my bag, thanked her, and left with one certainty. I needed to find more proof before it was too late for my family, too. "Miss Ellie, that young man was going through your father's drawers yesterday when you all left for your aunt's birthday." Rosa, our housekeeper, told me this as we folded sheets together, in a whisper so low I almost didn't hear. Her eyes, framed by deep wrinkles, showed genuine concern. In her 25 years working with us, Rosa had never gossiped or stirred trouble. If she was breaking her code of silence now, the situation was serious. "Can you help me find out what's happening, Rosa?" I asked, knowing she had access to corners of the house and conversations I never would. She nodded slowly, as if making an important decision. "Your mother would have wanted someone to take proper care of this house," she replied simply. That same week, Matt sent me the results of the property records search. The townhouse still had an active mortgage, renegotiated 3 times in the last 5 years. And worse, there was an acceleration clause I'd never have imagined. If my father missed 3 more payments, the bank could auction the property without further notice. 2 days later, Megan confronted me in the hallway. "What are you always talking to Rosa about, and why are you snooping through Dad's papers?" Her voice oscillated between anger and fear. I realized I wasn't the only one playing this investigation game. "Eleanor, what exactly are you trying to find?" My father blocked the entrance to his bedroom, arms crossed, a stern expression I hadn't seen since my teens. It was a hot August night, and I'd been careless rummaging through his drawers while he was supposedly at the movies with Megan and Ethan. "I just want to understand why you hide the house's financial situation from me, your financial analyst daughter, but share it with a stranger who showed up 6 months ago," I replied, maintaining the calm tone I use with nervous clients at the bank. "Ethan understands alternative investments that can help us quickly," my father answered without looking me in the eye. "Besides, he and Megan are planning to be together, build a life. He's practically family already." A laugh escaped my throat before I could stop it. "Dad, he doesn't even pay his own cell phone bill. His plan has been in Megan's name since March." I sensed a presence behind me and turned to find Ethan standing in the hallway, smiling as if he'd heard a compliment. "Always paying attention to details, aren't you, Ellie?" There was something predatory in that smile. "Maybe you should look for your own place. You clearly need more space." That night, I noticed my collection of financial analysis books had been rearranged, with the 3 most valuable ones mysteriously missing. The bank notification arrived on a Thursday in September, in an official envelope addressed to Robert Vance. Rosa intercepted it and handed it to me before it reached my father. In the cold language of bank notices, there it was. The townhouse would go to auction in 45 days due to non-payment of 6 consecutive installments. The initial panic gave way to a clarity I hadn't felt in months. I called Matt immediately. "There's a legal way for you to buy the property at auction, but we'll need to act fast and with absolute discretion," Matt explained as we walked through Fairmount Park, far from familiar ears. The bank where I worked could provide an employee loan with special conditions, covering 70% of the value. The rest would come from my 6 years of savings, all the money I'd ironically saved by living with my father. "Are you sure you want to do this, Eleanor? It's a significant amount." Matt's hand lightly touched my shoulder, a gesture of genuine concern. For a moment, I imagined giving up, taking that money, and starting over far from that dysfunctional family. But then I remembered the expression on my mother's face in the few photos I have of her, always looking at our Society Hill home with a pride that transcended the material. "I'm sure," I replied. "Some things are worth more than money." What I didn't say out loud was the corollary to that thought. And some lessons need to be taught, no matter the price. My room looked like a private investigator's office. On the wall behind the door, which I kept constantly locked, I mapped out Ethan's entire operation, copies of the police reports from Sarah, bank statements showing suspicious transfers from my father's account, photos of important documents that were systematically disappearing from drawers. The puzzle was almost complete. Only the final piece was missing. "Your sister and your father were with a realtor yesterday," Rosa informed me while watering the plants on the balcony. "I heard them talking about selling some antique furniture, and later on the phone your father told someone that you'd soon be finding your own way." It was like a punch to the gut. So that was it. Not only did they want Ethan living there permanently, but they were actively planning my departure. That night, sitting on my bed with all the documents spread out, I almost called my father and laid everything on the table. But something stopped me. His 60th birthday party was in 2 weeks. The perfect moment was already marked on the calendar, with all the guests as witnesses. Some revelations deserve a proper audience. "Let me organize everything, Dad. It's an important milestone. You deserve a special celebration." I offered to plan the party with my sweetest smile, one I rarely use. He seemed surprised. Normally, Megan handled these social functions, but she was too busy helping Ethan with an urgent project to care. Little did she know that having control of the guest list and logistics was exactly what I needed. The week before the party was surreal. I smiled, made calls to confirm the catering, chose decorations, all while finalizing the secret purchase of the townhouse with Matt and preparing every document I would present on the night of the party. Megan and Ethan seemed increasingly confident, openly making plans in front of me. "That room has the perfect light for my studio," he commented during dinner, pointing to my bedroom. Megan laughed and agreed, as if my departure were a done deal. My father just watched, a conflicted expression of guilt and relief. "You've seemed so happy lately, Eleanor," he commented the night before the party, looking genuinely confused. "I've found that having a clear plan for the future brings incredible peace," I replied, thinking of the black folder already prepared in my purse for the next day. What none of them imagined was that this would be the last night of the life they had known. The event space at the Independence Bistro in Old City was decorated with elegant simplicity, soft lights, arrangements of seasonal flowers, and carefully selected family photos on the tables. 50 people, longtime friends, colleagues from his city department job, distant relatives, chatted animatedly while I checked the black folder in my purse one more time. My navy blue dress, bought especially for this night, had internal pockets where I'd stored extra copies of the most important documents. Nothing could go wrong. "Attention, everyone!" Ethan's voice boomed, amplified by a microphone he wasn't even supposed to be using. "Let's make a toast to the birthday boy." Everyone raised their glasses. My father stood up, smiling emotionally, and took the microphone. He glanced at me for an instant. I saw a flicker of hesitation in his eyes before he addressed the guests. "Thank you for being here on this special day. I have an important announcement." He paused dramatically. "Ethan, my daughter Megan's boyfriend, will be moving in with us permanently." Then, looking directly at me with rehearsed firmness, he added, "Honey, your sister's boyfriend is moving in with us. You'll need to find another place to live." The silence that followed was broken only by Megan's shrill laugh. "Maybe a studio apartment." Some guests laughed nervously. Others looked away, embarrassed. I felt 50 pairs of eyes on me, expecting a reaction of humiliation. Instead, I smiled calmly and stood up. My time had come. "Thank you for the notice, Dad." My voice came out firmer than I expected as I opened the black folder on the table. But I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding about who needs to look for another place. I slowly pulled out the first document, the deed to the townhouse, now in my name, registered exactly 7 days prior. "I don't have the money to leave." I paused, feeling the weight of the absolute silence in the room. "I spent it all last month buying this house." The sound of my father's champagne flute shattering on the floor punctuated my revelation like a perfectly timed sound effect. Next, I placed the complete debt report on the table, proof of the mortgage payment I'd made to the bank, and finally the dossier on Ethan. "Perhaps you'd like to take a look at these police reports for fraud in 3 different cities. It seems our digital artist has a very diversified portfolio." Ethan turned visibly pale, his eyes frantically searching for the nearest exit. "How could you?" my father began, his voice failing. Aunt Carol, who was watching everything from a nearby table, slowly stood up and began to applaud. "Just like her mother," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Diane would be proud." It was the only sound in a room where time seemed to have frozen. "This is crazy!" Megan screamed, jumping up so abruptly she knocked over her chair. "You faked these documents. Dad, she's making all this up." Her eyes, welling with angry tears, darted between me and our father, seeking the support she'd always had. But Robert Vance seemed to have aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes, staring at the papers before him as if they were written in a language he couldn't comprehend. Ethan, recovering some composure, attempted a defense. "Look, Eleanor has always been jealous of the attention Megan gets." But his voice was cut off by Matt, who stood up from the table where I had strategically placed him. "As the attorney who assisted in this process, I can attest to the legality of all these documents." While Ethan tried to discreetly head for the exit, 2 men I'd never seen before blocked his path. "Mr. Harrison?" using one of Ethan's known aliases. "We'd like to talk to you about some outstanding matters in Austin." They were investigators Sarah had mentioned, whom I'd invited to the birthday surprise. Aunt Carol approached, put her hand on my shoulder, and said loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, "Diane would have done exactly the same." The mention of my mother's name made my father finally lift his eyes from the documents. "And what?" I saw there wasn't anger, as I'd expected, but something much more complex. Recognition. January brought a silence I'd never experienced in our Society Hill townhouse. The beige walls, once cramped for 4 people, now seemed to stretch infinitely around me. Megan left the day after the party, taking Ethan and 2 enormous suitcases, swearing never to speak to me again. My father, after 3 days of absolute silence, temporarily moved into his friend Mark's apartment in Manayunk, leaving only a short note. "I need time to process everything. I left the keys with Rosa." The nights were the worst. I wandered through the empty rooms, questioning my victory. The wall clock in the living room, a graduation gift from my mother to my father decades ago, seemed to tick louder in the silence. "You did what you had to do," Matt would tell me over the phone, his voice an unexpected comfort on the hardest nights. He offered to come stay with me, but something in me needed to face that emptiness alone. It was as if I were finally getting to know the house and myself without the constant noise of approval I never received. Rosa continued to come 3 times a week, the only constant in this new world. "Miss Diane also went through a period like this, alone in this house before she met your father," she commented while dusting the picture frames. "Some women need to find their own silence before they can hear their true voice." The doorbell rang at 11:17 p.m. on a rainy Tuesday in March. Through the peephole, I saw Megan, drenched, makeup smeared, and without the suitcases she'd taken. I opened the door without a word, and she entered just as silently. We stood like that for almost a minute, the sound of the rain filling the void between us. He disappeared with my credit card and my laptop, she finally said, her voice hoarse. I have nowhere to stay. There are 10 kinds of I told you so, I replied, heading to the linen closet for towels, and I'm restraining myself from using all of them right now. Megan laughed, a sad, broken sound I'd never heard from her before. As she dried her hair in the kitchen, she began to talk, first in short, tear-choked sentences, then in a continuous flow of revelations. How Ethan had convinced her I was envious and controlling. How he'd manipulated my father with tales of miracle investments. How he'd gradually isolated them from me, just as he'd done with his previous victims. Why didn't you show me the proof before the party? She finally asked, looking at the cup of tea I'd placed before her. Would you have believed me? I returned the question. Her silence was answer enough. That night, I offered her the guest room. I wasn't ready to give back her old room, nor was she ready to ask for it. Small steps on a path of reconciliation that was just beginning. There. Our rules now. I slid the paper across the kitchen table to Megan, who watched with a mixture of irritation and curiosity. It was a simple contract I'd drawn up myself, establishing the conditions for her to continue living in the house. Proportional financial contribution from the salary she'd just started earning as a receptionist at a spa. Division of household. Chores. Advance notice for visitors. Are you serious, Ellie? A contract to live in my own house? She raised an eyebrow, but her tone lacked its previous hostility. The house is mine now, technically. I tried to keep my voice neutral without sounding arrogant. But it will always be our house. We just need clear boundaries after everything that's happened. Megan looked at the paper for a few more seconds, then signed with a theatrical sigh. 2 weeks later, the doorbell rang again. My father stood in the hallway, looking smaller and older in his faded plaid shirt. Can I come in and talk? He asked, as if he were a stranger. The lunch that followed was the most honest we'd ever had. He admitted his mistakes, cried when he spoke of the spiral of debt he'd hidden out of shame, confessed his favoritism towards Megan. I never knew how to handle you, Eleanor, so much like your mother, so strong. When he finally asked if he could come back, I showed him a contract similar to Megan's. He laughed through tears. You really are a financial analyst to the end. We signed the papers on the table where so many silent meals had taken place, while Rosa smiled discreetly from the kitchen. It started with a wall. This shade of yellow has been hideous since I moved in here at age 10, I declared one Saturday, holding paint rollers and cans of grayish-blue paint. Megan, surprised by my aesthetic initiative, usually her territory, hesitantly joined in. My father, after watching our clumsy attempts for half an hour, finally picked up a roller and began to teach the correct technique. Your mother painted this townhouse herself when we moved in, too stubborn to hire painters. The following weeks brought small transformations, new curtains, rearranging the living room furniture, a deep clean that revealed forgotten boxes in the back of closets. In one, we found photo albums my father had kept hidden. Diane Vance smiling in front of the newly built townhouse, holding the keys. Diane, pregnant with me, painting what would be my room. Diane and my father, young, toasting at the same table where we now ate our meals with a new awareness. She chose this place, you know. Your father wanted a bigger place in another neighborhood, but your mother insisted on this one, Aunt Carol. Told us during an afternoon coffee, her first visit in years. Diane used to say a home didn't need to be big, it just needed to be true. As the walls received new colors, something deeper also transformed between us. A silent understanding that we were, for the first time, building an honest home. Ms. Vance, this is Richard Stone from Keystone Developers. The call came on a sunny Thursday in June while I was analyzing reports at the bank. We're developing a project on your block, and your property is the last one we need to acquire. Initially, I thought of hanging up. Offers from developers were common in desirable Philadelphia neighborhoods where old townhouses constantly gave way to new ventures. But the amount mentioned next made my eyebrows shoot up, almost triple what I had invested 6 months earlier. With all due respect, Mr. Stone, I'm not interested in selling, I replied automatically, more out of instinct than decision. I understand, but I ask you to consider. We're talking about a value that would allow the purchase of 3 properties of similar standard in other areas. He paused calculatedly. We could even help find options that meet your family's needs. I hung up, promising to think about it, but the idea had already taken root. 3 separate homes. Real independence for everyone. A healthy distance that might preserve the fragile reconciliation we had achieved. Matt, when I told him about the offer that night during dinner, leaned forward with interest. This could be exactly what you all need. A new beginning without the baggage of the past. It was a tempting prospect. Rational, financially sound. Exactly the kind of solution the old Eleanor would have embraced without hesitation. Over the weekend, I turned the living room table into a makeshift office, spreading out spreadsheets, mortgage simulations, and property listings in different neighborhoods. 3 two-bedroom homes, perhaps one in Fishtown for Megan, one in Graduate Hospital for my dad, and one in Society Hill, or a different part of it, for me, would fit comfortably within the budget, with money left over for new furniture. On my screen, numbers and projections clearly showed the financial advantage of the proposal. It was simple, irrefutable math. "What are all these papers?" Megan asked, entering the room with a cup of coffee. There was genuine curiosity in her voice. In recent months, she'd gotten a promotion at the spa, started a technical course in aesthetics, and surprisingly, adhered to all the clauses of our living agreement. My father, now working part-time as a consultant and finally managing his high blood pressure properly, approached too. "Is Eleanor planning a major investment?" There was confidence in his voice, the confidence he should have had in me years before. I looked at them both, then at the floor plans of the carefully separated homes I had selected. The distance between them could be measured in miles. For the first time in my life, I hesitated in the face of perfect numbers. How could I explain that after fighting so hard for control of this house, I was considering dividing it into 3 separate parts? And worse, how could I admit I wasn't sure I wanted to? Sunday morning, I found my father watering the plants on the balcony, a new habit he'd adopted since returning. "These ferns were your mother's favorite," he commented without looking at me. "She said they were stubborn like her, hard to care for but impossible to kill." We stood in silence, watching the street life many floors below. "I know you have the power to decide about this house now," he said finally. "And whatever decision you make, I'll respect it. I've made too many mistakes to judge anyone else's choices." Sunday lunch became a ritual in our home again, but different from the past. Now we all cooked together. Megan discovered an unexpected talent for desserts, I mastered the main courses, and my father became an expert in elaborate salads. That afternoon, as we savored a sticky toffee pudding Megan had made following my mother's newly discovered recipe, found written on the back of an old photo, I observed the scene with new eyes. The way we talked without filters, laughed at inside jokes, how the silences were no longer tense but comfortable. There was an authenticity in our interaction that never existed before. The house, with its freshly painted walls and rearranged furniture, was no longer a battlefield for attention and power, but a space where 3 imperfect people were learning to build something they never truly had: a family. On Monday, Richard from Keystone Developers called again, now offering an even higher sum and additional benefits. "We can wait until the end of the month, but we need a definitive position, Ms. Vance." I thanked him, promised an answer in 2 weeks, and hung up. On my way home that day, I deviated from my usual route and drove to Rittenhouse Square. Sitting on a bench overlooking the park, I took out my black notebook, no longer a record of grievances, but now a journal of reflections. The first page, I wrote 2 columns, sell and stay. Under sell, complete financial independence, personal space, a clean restart, the possibility of a relationship with Matt without the shadow of my dysfunctional family. Under stay, the continuation of reconciliation, my mother's memories. In the walls, the unexpected comfort of having recovered a family I never thought I'd truly have. Both lists seemed equally compelling. Now, sitting on the balcony as the sun sets over Philadelphia, I watch through the window as my father and Megan chat animatedly in the living room, setting the table for dinner. I still haven't revealed the offer to them. The sales contract is in my purse, unsigned. The pen feels heavy in my pocket, like a decision I never imagined would be so difficult. Numbers have always been easy for me. People and feelings? Not so much. What would you do in my place? Would you choose the security of a hard-won reunion, even with all its emotional risks, or the freedom that money could provide for all of us? Sometimes I wonder if there's a mathematical formula to calculate the true value of a home.